I'm Elliot, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, and welcome. It's October 20th, early afternoon here in Israel, Sunday. And of course, the big news over the past few days is the elimination of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar this past Wednesday, confirmed on Thursday on the holiday of Sukkot. And now we're a few days later. The pieces are still falling, information is still coming out. And what I'd like to do in this conversation is discuss a number of things. First of all, how it came about. Second, what is the immediate impact? And third, what is the further down the road impact, perhaps, on Hamas and the war against Hamas? So, first, he was not found in a tunnel. He was scampering around in the Rafiah neighborhood of Tel Sultan, a place that I was actually in many, many years ago in 2002 in my short service in the Gaza division back in the day. And taken out by a team of infantry and armor operating in the area, not quite as random as it's made out to be, and not quite as amateur luck as it's made out to be, going back, and not the amateur luck that it's being made out to be. The infantry that spotted him and ran him to ground, I've seen reports that, they weren't all that serious. They were a bunch of trainees. Not exactly. They are trainees, in fact, of the squad leaders course in the infantry school. In other words, this is essentially an all-star team of infantrymen drawn from all of the infantry brigades, selected, being trained to command squads, to be promoted to sergeant, and, if anything, as a group, more proficient than the average infantry company. Not by a lot, but certainly no lower than that. Here, full disclosure, I actually was involved in training the 450th Battalion many, many, many years ago. No relation to the guys today. They weren't even born yet. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, about 25 years ago, I trained them in fieldcraft, camouflage, movement, and the like, and maybe some of it is still filtering through there. Any association, even remote, with this operation is a good one. In any event, they saw these three figures. They opened fire on them. He scampered into a building. He was picked up by a drone. He threw a stick at it. It wasn't terribly effective. And a tank fired on the room that he was in that was much more effective, and we know the rest of the story. It wasn't random. It was known that he was in the area. As a matter of fact, in the tunnel in which the 6 hostages' bodies, the murdered hostages' bodies, were found, not far from them, DNA evidence was found that he was there. It's not clear whether they were the human shields being used to protect him. There are those who say yes, those who say no. But he chose to leave the tunnel and go above ground. The reason he was in Tel Sultan in the first place is because he had been driven out of Rafiah in the ground operation that everybody said Israel shouldn't do because there was no point in doing it. And as the area that he was hiding in, the tunnels that he was hiding in, were slowly being taken over. He fled to the outskirt neighborhood of Tel Sultan, which is also part of Rafia, nearer the Mediterranean and not far from the Egyptian border. And it was pretty well known that he was there. Now, not exactly where, and here it wasn't a directed strike of the Hassan Nasrallah type, knowing precisely where he was, but the ground forces were closing in and were aware that he was in the neighborhood. So, not a precision takeout, but a well-designed trap operation that he eventually fell into. It wasn't inevitable, but he did, and he was eliminated. What it means immediately for Hamas is a huge hit, morale, command, leadership. Here was a guy who was not only the commander of Gaza, but since the elimination of Ismail Haniyeh, he was the actual head of Hamas. And now, in a bit, we'll get to what that means for Hamas in terms of the future. But in the immediate sense, the man who designed and pushed and created and executed the massacre of this past year is October 7th, a year ago. The man who ran the operations for the past year through the fight with the IDF. The man who essentially agreed to everything but agreeing to the hostage exchange that would release the remaining hostages in their hands, however many there are, is taken out. And he had become something of a legend. He'd spent the past year running from Israel. As a matter of fact, there was one point a few months ago where he made his own personal protection a condition in any deal with Israel. He knew that he was at the top of the list and gained something of a reputation of being invincible, invulnerable, always a step ahead of the Israeli military. There were a few times when forces went into tunnels and found that he had been there even earlier that day, in some cases a few days before. He had hidden under Shifa Hospital in Gaza and was gone before the forces got there. So he was one of those always one step ahead and with the reputation to go with that. And with that, and we're seeing this in the aftermath, very similar to the propaganda that came out after Hitler's suicide. And I'm not comparing him to Hitler. There are certain similarities, but not very, very careful not to overstate them. But when Hitler committed suicide, the German news reported that he died heroically fighting the Russians in the Battle of Berlin, where, of course, he shot himself in a room in his underground bunker. Here, as well, the Hamas propaganda, the Palestinian propaganda, is making him out to be the heroic fighter who went down fighting against the IDF heroically, rather than scampering in an attempt to escape and then being so severely wounded that he couldn't move and then was eventually eliminated. But that reputation is important to them because the morale impact here is also very, very high. Sinwar, over the past decade at least, has been a central figure, a planning figure, an ideologue. And as we discussed in the conversation we had after Hassan Nasrallah was eliminated, very, very difficult person to replace as an individual leader. They'll certainly replace him, just as Hezbollah is replacing the entire command echelon that have been eliminated over the past couple of months, replacing them with unknowns, sort of like bringing up a pitcher from the minor leagues to pitch a key game in the World Series. He can stand on the mound and throw, but that doesn't mean he's going to do very much. So nominally, they do have a command structure still there, but let's not overstate it. The same. Now the question is, aside from the damage that's been done, where does Hamas go from here? And at this point, it's too early to say with any certainty. So let's talk about some of the possibilities and some of the options. Here, predicting how this is going to play itself out is kind of like trying to predict the outcome of the upcoming American presidential elections. Too close to call. It'll probably be too close to call on election day, and we'll know that what the outcome is when there's an outcome. But in the meantime, let's understand some of the ramifications. First of all, as I said earlier, Sinwar was holding two positions. And one of the reasons he was holding them is because of who he was, what he was, where he was. And he had the ability to veto decisions made in Qatar by the so-called political leadership. Those are the guys who are living in the 7-star hotels. But he had the strength, he had the power, he had the charisma to tell them that they would have to do what he wanted, and he was ultimately appointed to take over when Ismail Haniyeh was eliminated in terror. That fusion of positions, head of the political or the organizational end of Hamas, as well as the operational leader in Gaza, need not remain unified, and here I would say unlikely to remain unified. And one of the Qatar guys, whether it'll be Khalid Mashal or one of the others, Mashal I think is a high probability candidate, will take over as the titular head of the Hamas organization. Within Gaza itself, his brother, Sinwar's brother, Muhammad, who was apparently even more radical and fanatical than Yahya Sinwar, the kind of an interesting characterization, was also in the tunnel somewhere in Rafah, is one possible candidate. There are a couple of others less well known, but in any event, we're not going to see a huge difference in position, difference in skill perhaps, and I would assume difference in skill, lower, but these are still leaders of Hamas. They're not people being brought out of nowhere as Hezbollah is doing, as I said before, people to contend. Will the movement collapse? In all probability not. And here we need to understand that as important as Sinwar was, just as important as Nasrallah was, both Hezbollah and Hamas are long-standing organizations with institutions, and the institutions survive the leaders. So there won't be an immediate organizational collapse. There may be a coordination collapse and weakness, again, as we're seeing with Hezbollah. But this is not as the Americans have always hoped, take out the leader and everything falls apart. That's a very rare occurrence. It works with a defeated organization or a defeated country. Again, Nazi Germany comes to mind. Hitler's suicide was basically the end of the story. But another one of the many great differences, between Sinwar and Hitler is that Hitler had subordinated all of Germany's institutions to himself. Sinwar did not do. So the institutions will survive. What will happen to the rank and file? And here we have a bipolar possibility, possibly bipolar psychologically within individuals, but certainly between them. Some will lose faith. The great leader is gone, and with him, everything goes. How many will fall into that category? We'll have to wait and see. For others, it will be the symbolic loss of a great leader to them, and they will want to aspire to live up to his standards and remain as fanatical as they were, using his death as a martyr, as a personal example for themselves. My estimate is that will be the more likely result. In other words, to summarize, we come out ahead in many, many ways certainly not behind in eliminating Yahya Sinwar. Is this the ultimate victory, the ultimate step that will lead to the collapse of Hamas, the softening of Hamas, a great compromise and release of the hostages, and Hamas suddenly turning into a Western liberal democratic organization? No, it will not. So we've weakened them. We've taken a great step forward in defeating them, but there's still a lot of work left to do. And the remaining force and remaining leadership that's running the organization. So with that, once again, it's October 20th, a few days after the elimination of Yahya Sinwar, and the world is a better place. Israel is in a better position. We've paid the debt that's been open since last October 7th, but there's still quite a bit of work left to do to finish this war and to finish Hamas. Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.